Hey DCC, and welcome to another edition of Morning Coffee. I don't know about your neighborhood, but in our neighborhood, you can kind of start to see the first indications of Christmas sometime in November. Sometimes it's even before then, but usually somewhere around Thanksgiving time. That Christmas season is kind of upon us, right? And so you start to see these lights and the appearance of lights everywhere. Storefronts have them. I guess some of my neighbors keep them up all year round, but at least they plug them in November sometime. But you start to see all these Christmas lights, and it's just this kind of this beautiful time of the year that we think. And there's places where you can go, and some people even have them tuned to songs and radio stations and all kinds of stuff, right? When I was in college, and I had to take some time, my dad had prostate cancer and was kind of suffering. They thought it would be terminal, so I went back to spend some time with them and take care of my mom. And so I was going to school at BBC in Clark Summit, Pennsylvania. But during that time, I had the opportunity to go with a friend, and we went to New York City right around Christmas time. We got to view the lights, and it was just amazing, right? And I know that before then I had seen the Christmas lights and Times Square and all that stuff on television, and so you kind of think you know what it's like until you get there and you see these huge buildings and millions of lights and LED lights and all kinds of things, and you're kind of blown away. It's just magical. It's so different when you're there live in person than it is just watching it on television. But when we think of the history of Christmas around the date of December 25th, right? It wasn't always celebrated December 25th. The birth of Christ wasn't always just something that we picked a day to celebrate. But when we started to, in Christian tradition, most of the origins of that celebration around December 25th came in kind of the Mediterranean area and in Europe. And so in those two particular locations in our world, December 25th is kind of coming on the cusp of the darkest time, so to speak. So it's kind of like this, the days are the shortest ever. There's the least amount of light. It seems like you wake up and it's dark, and by the time you get out of work, it's dark. It's one of those type of things. So there's very little sunlight. It's the shortest days of the year kind of coming into December 25th. And then from that time forward, the day gets longer, and we get to see that the sun comes back in. So there's this significance around December 25th and this idea of light. So the lights aren't just decorative, right? In tradition, around Christmas time, they're highly symbolic. And so we know that in many ways, the world is this dark place, right? And as followers of Jesus, we know that we can't find our own way, that we're not able to find our own way. We're not able to see the true reality of this world. Jesus has to become our light, and then we can see, and then we can find our way. And so I wanted to read from you the biblical author Matthew, the beginning of the New Testament, in chapter 4, verse 16 says this. He says, the people living in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. And then John, just a few books later, he says it this way in chapter 1. He says, the true light that gives light to everyone coming into the world, he was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. And so when I was a kid, I grew up a pastor's kid, right? So my dad was preaching, and I grew up in a Baptist church, so Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, it was just, as many times as the door was open, we were at church. And so I heard lots of talk about darkness. But as I grew older, and I asked that question, what is this? How is the world dark? What does it mean? Why do we talk about darkness in that sense? As I got older and I got into college and I started studying, I realized that the Bible kind of has two understandings of the word darkness. One refers to evil, just evil, and the other is to ignorance or to not knowing, okay? And so in both those connotations, that's how the word darkness is used. And so, on one hand, our world is dark because for many, it's just a place that's filled with evil and untold suffering. And I want you to think about that. I know that in America we're kind of spoiled and we've got a rich life, but it doesn't take us far where we can stumble on darkness, right? I mean, even here, there are people who suffer, there are people who go through pain, there are people who feel all alone and everything, but so much more in like third world countries, right? Where there is suffering, there's people who are starving, there's people who are terrorists, there's people who are very oppressed. And so there's this idea of this darkness, this evil, this kind of this film that kind of falls all over the earth. And I want you to know that the same was true when Jesus was born. Jesus was born at a time where there was violence, there's injustice, there was abuse of power, there's homelessness, there's refugees that are fleeing oppression, just like there is today. In fact, Jesus was one of those, right? Herod is trying to kill all these male babies, and so Mary and Joseph and Jesus flee to Egypt, and for a while are hanging out as refugees in Egypt until that time passes. There's families that are ripped apart, right? And to a great extent during the time of Jesus, as is similar to our time, there's just this bottomless grief, right? In many places in the world, there's been oppression and suffering and hard circumstances that have gone on for generations, right? And that can just feel hopeless and bottomless, that there's this grief and these things that happen, but that just don't ever seem like they're going to stop. And so that might not be your experience today, or maybe during the Christmas time you're just trying to put all that behind you or to a side and be positive, and I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. But you don't have to go very far to find darkness, right? This past week, we had one of our own brothers fall with a heart attack. And in fact, he still remains hospitalized, and our prayers are ever vigilant for him and for his family and for him to get better and be more restored. And God's been answering those prayers, and we've seen that recovery. But while we were kind of going through that process, it didn't take us long to realize that this darkness that's in this world can just kind of come in and catch us off guard. We all were thinking Christmas Eve services and production and all kinds of stuff, and we had 10,000 things on our list of things to do, and all of a sudden, right out of the clear blue, we have something that we didn't expect. And it's a very tragic event, and we have a rude awakening of what this world can bring to us, right? And while we were there and we were sitting there and we were trying to talk through things and make sense of things, we were waiting on the doctor to give us some word back. And it was the first time that he was going to talk to us and tell us how our friend was doing. We were sitting there in this waiting room, and there was this lady, and she turns to us and she says, "Hey, I've been praying for you, and I've been praying for your friend." Because my husband was on the operating table, but due to the severity of your friend, they moved him off the operating table and put your friend on. And so I know that he must be in very serious condition, and he took priority. And so from that point forward, I've been praying for you and for your friend. And here sat this woman, right? She doesn't know the outcome of her husband's operation. He's in critical condition. She's in obvious distress. You can see the stress and anxiety all over her face. And we're familiar with the questions that she's asking, right? What if he doesn't come home? What am I going to do without him? He runs this business and I can't run it by myself. I don't know what it's like to be alone. I'm going to be so lonely. And then to add to her anxiety, it's almost in just a few seconds, I hear her somewhat loud and obnoxious son come in, who I would put somewhere in his early 30s. And he says super loud so everyone could hear, he's like, "Mom, don't worry, I'm not going to do meth again. And, I'll be able to take over for Dad." And so in the midst of this week where there's celebration and there's all these things, we get hit with darkness and hopelessness. And when her son, who means well, I'm sure, right? but he contributes, maybe unwittingly. He doesn't mean to, but he contributes to his mom's anxiety and grief and loneliness and hopelessness. So we don't have to go very far to find darkness in this place, do we? And the other way that the world is dark is that no one around us, nobody in this world, not the greatest science minds, not the greatest philosophers, the people who are thinking through illnesses and how to conquer them, there's nobody that has been able to put together enough knowledge to cure the world of evil and suffering that occur in it. If you're familiar with Handel's Messiah, it uses this portion of Isaiah chapter 9, and it says, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light." And in that passage, if you go to the previous chapter in chapter 8, and I think it's somewhere probably around verse 20 or 21, I can't remember, we see the Jews are doing this kind of search for meaning, for answers, and they're consulting mediums and magicians instead of God. And so in chapter 8 of Isaiah, somewhere around, I think, 20 or 21, it says, "Distressed and hungry, they will roam through the land. They will look toward the earth and see only distress and darkness and fearful gloom." You know, and today is not too much different for us, right, in many ways. Many people turn to the earth. They turn to science. They turn to ingenuity to try to right the world. But what did we learn? If you think back over the last 100 years, what did we learn? Well, we learned that science, unguided by Christian principles and morals, gives us the Holocaust. We learn that technology and capitalistic systems and money and economic boon and all of those things don't cure us or save us from nuclear conflict. They don't save us from ethnic violence. They don't save us from all these other things, right? So no matter how much technology, no matter how much economics, no matter how much wealth we gain for ourselves, no matter what we throw at it, none of us are able to somehow, through those things, plot our way to solving the world's problems and solving problems that have plagued us for years and years and years, right? And ironically, it wasn't that long ago, it was just a few years ago, that I heard wisdom come from the most unlikely of places. And I don't mean if you're from the Czech Republic, don't get mad at me. But I don't always think of the Czech Republic as some place where all this wisdom is going to pour out of. But their first president of the Czech Republic, his name was Václav Havel. Václav Havel, who's the first president of the Czech Republic, he said this, and I want you to listen to what he said because I think it's just beautiful. He said, "Pursuit of the good life will not help humanity save itself, nor is democracy enough alone. A turning to and seeking of God is needed." And so when we are thinking of these Christmas lights that are now all over the place, right? And they're decorating our homes, they're at the stores, they're on storefronts, they're everywhere that we can look. Let's not forget the symbolism that is there, because it wasn't out of the world where there came light in this darkness. There wasn't out of the world where evil was conquered. It wasn't out of our own ingenuity. It wasn't for the Jews. It wasn't mediums and magicians. For us, it's not science and technology and everything else. The light of Christmas is not that Jesus makes us powerful enough to set the world to right. It's the opposite. Humanity can't save itself. Christmas, the real meaning of Christmas, those living in this land of deep darkness, a light has dawned, right? This Jesus has come onto the scene, and upon the world a light has dawned, and Jesus is the light, and he alone can save our world. And that's really the meaning of Christmas. So today, think about that. Think about all the ways in which we chase after the wind and try to, change things by our own willpower or ingenuity or thoughts, and realize that it is hopeless. We have to turn to a Savior. We have to turn to Jesus. Let Him light our way, because it's only Him that can save our world. All right? Take care. Have a good day.